and you will hear that. Right. So everyone will have a chance to ask questions at the end. You can turn on your videos then if you wish and introduce yourselves and ask Evan or myself any questions to do with the exhibition. Now, before we, sorry, but please do keep yourselves on mute in the meantime to facilitate with the whole recording process. Thank you. Now, before we begin, just very quickly, the structure for the event today. We will do a quick video walkthrough of the show for the benefit of those who haven't seen it in the flesh. And even those who have, I think you might benefit from having a quick look around at this pre-recorded video of the show in our gallery. And then we'll move on to a whole series of questions. First of all, to do with the works themselves, Evan's practice in general, and then we'll move to some broader discussions. Okay. Now let me begin by sharing screen. If I do that. All right. Sorry, I'll start from the beginning. So that's the exhibition. So you can see that Evan tends to work in very large formats. But also some very small focused detailed works, including these cards that are text-based. And these prints, which Evan will talk about in greater detail later. We might skip over some of these, so you can look at the rest of the works. So that's the view of it from the distance. And some close-up shots. Very vivid and powerful, as you can see. And again, these very fascinating works on paper that are bullet encasing prints, which are sharp contrast to his other big format works. Okay. We're just going to finish off quickly on this last wonderful large format print. Okay, and maybe this is a good place to pause. Point of difference. Well, thanks, Erica, for just joining us. Could you put yourself on mute? All right, now, Evan, let's begin with the inspiration behind this new body of work. Now, we know that you did most of this, if not all of this, really, in Estonia, where you have spent quite a number of months. Would you like to talk a little bit more about, what drove you to create these works and what this exhibition is about?
Okay, I think first off, so I went to Estonia last year in September to do my military service conscription, and that began in October. And with the exhibition coming up, the current one, I already had the thought that there'd be some inspiration from that. Possibly, but I still thought I might actually get home in time to make work for this show, but that didn't happen. So kind of during my service, I had the exhibition in the back of my head as well. And I was keeping up to date with what's happening with like around the world politically, and kind of just the things that were really I was really paying attention to. So of course, well, first of all, the lockdown was the third major work on the right there. That was probably the first kind of work that developed for this exhibition.
Sorry, which work is it, Evan?
Like,
is it the work on the right of the gallery? So I'll just show everyone which one.
Yeah, the one with the cruise ships, planes in it.
Let's kind of.
And those.
Not those ones. Hang on, this is the small work. This one.
Yeah, this one. So when I knew that I wasn't going to get back to Sydney in time to actually make work for this exhibition, doing something about being stuck overseas, the Australian government's kind of border controls that were keeping people from coming home unless they had the money to get a flight back, and certainly just the luck as well. And being part of a Facebook group of Australians stuck overseas, and the comments on there and people's feelings on, I guess, getting abandoned by the government and the country, and the kind of it felt like a very deliberate campaign to kind of keep Australians overseas there, like kind of pass the blame on the whole situation onto them of any kind of outbreaks happening in Australia.
Mm.
So let's. But in terms of
sorry.
Yeah, go on.
So let's kind of come back to the title of your exhibition, which is linked to the theme, Attachment, Detachment. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a kind of combination of the being an Australian, Estonian, going overseas to do military service in Estonia, but also being Australian during COVID. I mean, I love living in Sydney and Australia, and I love living in Estonia as well, but certainly the COVID situation brought about a lot of strong feelings about what it means to be Australian, especially if you're kind of stuck overseas, or the very obvious kind of attachments you have to your home country, or kind of your cultural backgrounds, but it's also very easy to get kind of see the worst side of that, I guess, exchange of being a citizen for a country. Like even I volunteered to do the military service in Estonia, but at the same time, for a lot of people, that's something they do their best to try and get out of. And also it was a good experience, but it's also, you have some tough times in there as well, for sure.
I think one of the fascinating things is how you draw on that experience, or how that sort of gels or doesn't gel with your practice as an artist. And of course, we want to talk about your bullet facing prints here.
Yeah.
Tell us more about this wall of installation works of your various prints, which is vastly different from your large format work.
Yeah. So I always had the plan. It was about January when I was doing my paramedic training in the city Tartu, and there's a print studio there. So on my weekend, I went over to this print studio, paper museum, and asked them if it's possible to do a residency in June when my service finished. And they said, no problem. So from then on, I was always thinking about how I could use different things from the army, like collecting the bullet casings after we were at the range or doing other kind of training, and repurposing them into, I guess, print objects.
Sorry, 1 second. Someone has muted themselves. Can we please ask you to go on mute? Thank you. Okay, thanks. If you just press the mute button, please. Thank you. Because we're recording this. All right. Sorry, Evan. You were talking about using the bulletproof, the bullet casings, and repurposing them. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was an entirely experimental process. I had no idea how the hell do you print with bullet casings? What do you have to do to create something out of that? So these kind of first couple of weeks when I'm at the studio, I'm having to cut these things in half, find out how they're actually constructed so I could figure out a way to actually utilize them. And the kind of abstract shape, I mean, it lends itself to a lot more of an abstract kind of direction for the work. And so it was mostly, it's an experimental process that for me was well outside my comfort zone, but I could make these interesting prints, just experimenting, mixing different colors, and making imagery that's based on my experiences, but obviously can be interpreted quite broadly by anyone who views the work.
But at the same time, they are symbolic, aren't they? Some of these prints. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe starting from the bottom row with the orange and the greens and the purples.
So for those ones, I tried to make, from what I was thinking when I'm making them is thinking of different situations I was in, or bits of equipment that we used or that I saw used. So for for example, the one in the middle, in the left three, that's representative of the time our tent almost did catch on fire during basic training, which was quite an interesting experience. So that's kind of a bit of an obvious story there. Like the one in the middle on the right, that's kind of based on the paramedic training I did, ambulance placement, the use of blue and red in that print there. So it's kind of like, making these kind of images based on different experiences. And for example, the ones at the front of the exhibition, with the exhibition title and my name, those three were based on the unit badges that I wore, the air defense, medicine, and the Vira Battalion, which was the first place I did basic training for 2 months.
Wonderful. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about the other sections of this installation on the left, for instance, all those series of bullet casings?
Yeah, so these...
Just 1 second, welcome. We're recording this proceeding, so you might wish to turn off your video. Thank you. And put yourself on mute. Thanks.
So yeah, the series of prints on the top left there, they were one of my original kind of experimentations with these bullet casing prints on, and should also mention the papers recycled from army newspapers and a little bit of other kind of more stuff mixed in to keep strength to the paper. And so I was...
Sorry, what is this other extra stuff that you put in to strengthen the paper?
Just it's, what was it called? Like cell, to just give extra strength to whatever you mix. It's like a bit of it's made from paper, and then kind of, I'm not too sure about the process. But I know it just makes the paper a bit stronger. And I chucked in a bit of art paper as well, just to give a bit of more whiteness to some of the spots on the paper there.
Wonderful.
So nothing too interesting, just a little bit.
I think it's fascinating that you have drawn directly from your experience and relating it to your art making. Now, can you walk, everyone here through the relationship between those bullet case prints on the left and the ones on the right, the small series of 9 on the right with the rifles?
Yep. So the ones on the left were, so the process was actually inking up these bullet casings, printing them with several sheets of paper again and again until the ink just faded off these bullet casings. That was a bit of it. The initial ones I did of those was experimenting just to see the effect, but that would kind of represent kind of memory and about things like, it was 8 months for the service, and there's 16 there, so it was 2 lots of 8, kind of representative of how memory just fades over time. That's a kind of obvious conclusion you can draw from that one. The ones on the right were kind of a bit of just having fun with the paper making and printing process, and just, at least for me, it was just like having a bit of a laugh with these prints, like the different rifles I used or got my hands on during my time, and the firing modes on the guns you had. So there was safety, single shot, and fully automatic. And so it's kind of like, this is my artistic field manual for these rifles.
Now, let's move away from these very experimental works to your, and then we can see some lovely shots of the close-up. You can see the texture, really. So we've tried to capture this on video for those of you who are joining us from somewhere else in the world or just haven't seen the works in person. You can see how textured they are.
You get a very nice emboss as well with the...
All right, so let's move away from this to the large format work, which is what you're known to do. But even in this exhibition, the way in which you've executed this is completely different from how you normally would do it. So I think this is where it gets interesting, and we should talk about this.
Okay, so we'll start with this work here, 8 Forgotten Months. And so this kind of like, when I was making the work and trying to come up with ideas for what to send over, like things were changing all the time, just based on whether I thought I could get back, or how the hell am I going to make work and send it from Estonia and make it successful. But the concept behind this one was simply conflicts and stuff that were happening around the globe that were not necessarily getting much media coverage. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff in here was shown on the media in Australia, maybe a little bit, but I did notice, like, for instance, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, that got a lot of coverage in Estonia, but I think they got pretty much like a 24-hour government news channel almost. That's not affected by the Murdoch media, which is actually quite nice over here. But so this covers, I'll start from the left, and this ties back into my service as well, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and the top and bottom, the blue sections, were drone footage that the Azerbaijani government was promoting as for propaganda of like, look how successful we are against the Armenian forces. And kind of following this conflict, when I was going into my service and in basic training, that was a bit of the motivation for me to join the Air Defence Battalion, kind of seeing how dangerous kind of this technology is, and for a fraction of the cost of putting someone in a jet fighter and sending missiles off. So going into the explosions there next to it, Azerbaijan was getting weapons from Turkey, who was backing them very, very much so militarily, but also Israel. They were using Israeli drones to attack the Armenian forces. So not to get too much into the politics of kind of being under attack all the time, and also creating their own arms industry and exporting that to countries that probably aren't too friendly to them normally anyway, is quite ironic in a way. But so that's a kind of connection between the first two areas of the artwork there. The explosions as well, that was the when there was the Gaza Israeli kind of conflict earlier in the year. And then just above that, it's a bit hard to see in the video, but it was actually a separate bit of imagery from the Turkish attacks on of the Kurdish people in northern Syria. And I believe they even do some airstrikes in Iraqi Kurdistan sometimes. So it's these two kind of nations who've got these arms industries that they're really both promoting. Going on to a bit more of an obscure conflict as well, the more green section there is the conflict in Ethiopia at the moment. There's the northern region, Tigray, which has been fighting against the government forces. That this one's a completely mental conflict. There's a lot behind it, a lot of history. Hard to summarize it, but essentially this region, Tigray, fighting against the Ethiopian government. They weren't happy with their representation, and at this point in time, they're pretty much winning the conflict with other separatist groups joining them. It's a mix of imageries from the blurry people in the bottom are surrendered Ethiopian soldiers. There was this great image of a Ethiopian policeman that I came across, and I mean, it represents like the COVID times as well. He's got the mask on over there during a civil war in that conflict. But also interested as well in the media coming out of the country and the conflict was this YouTube video of a Tigrayan woman on the phone, on the radio with whatever forces were in the field, and then just nonchalantly sending off this artillery shell. And so I kind of did a bit of a mashup of images from that little video to incorporate into the work. Like it was a pretty crazy bit of footage, and I think even just the 21st century, it's so easy to get like high definition images and footage from every corner of the globe about anything and everything.
I think this segues very well, Evan, into the technical aspect of this work, and basically telling us how you've done this quite differently to your normal screen printing practice.
Yeah. So this is, in a way, this is a simplification of the normal screen print process I do. But to put it simply, I make up these these photo montages in Photoshop or whatever program I've got access to, and then turn that into a halftone image. So these digital images turned into a halftone and commercially printed. But normally they would be the positives for me to do my screen printing. So essentially each sheet of paper on the wall there would be a positive for me to expose onto a screen for screen printing, and then I'd either spray paint the paper first, screen print over the top and spray paint again, or just screen print and then spray paint over the top. But for these ones, because of the limitations of facilities over there, these were commercially printed onto just normal 80 GSM paper, spray painted over the top, and and then once it's pasted up as well, that kind of smooths out the spray painting particles, I guess, that are on the top still. That it smooths it out a bit and gives the work a bit of a slightly different effect to my usual work that's on kind of fine art paper.
Absolutely.
It's only subtle, but there is a slight kind of change when it's pasted.
Yes and no. So from a curatorial perspective, given that your work has got quite a political bent, whether it's commentary or otherwise, the fact that it takes this mode of thin paper and paste ups, it's got a long history of, being linked to, political commentary on social issues.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The medium itself, which I'm sure you're very conscious of when you chose it, lends itself very well, to the message. And just moving on to your other large format work.
Ooh, actually, just the end there of that work.
Yep.
After the Ethiopian part, that's showing the West Papua occupation by Indonesia and the kind of conflict there at the moment. And that was actually really difficult to get pictures for, because Indonesia's done their best to stop media coming out of the region. So
and
that's
how did you manage to uncover footage of that?
I mean, there is pictures available, but it's almost exclusively either Indonesian kind of army propaganda, or it's images that West Papuans have smuggled out or were sending it. Like, they were sending out images when they could, but they're quite poor quality. And it's kind of actually, I guess, the kind of propaganda images of the resistance forces, a lot of them as well. So,
right.
But certainly you can't get as many pictures like with other conflicts for that.
So that in itself, is a reflection of the nature of, that story from that part of the world.
Yeah.
So have you got more to talk about this particular work? If not, we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think we've pretty well covered that one. It's pretty political, so you can always add more to it too.
So you can see the details here, but I'm sure there will be more and questions from attendees at the end. But let's move on to this one.
Okay. So
you see a self-portrait there.
Yeah. So this artwork here is based on my conscription in my time. It was 8 months I did. You either do 8 or 11 months. And I think this is the first work where all the images in it are actually my own, which is kind of nice. And this is a kind of little bit of an overview of my time there. The images on the left-hand side were from our, what would be the translation in this English? Like our final kind of march. That was 50, 60 kilometers in 48 hours. That's kind of your final task to do before you finish your basic training. And there was bloody cold too. And that little self-portrait image was from our squad medic training that we did in December. And that was kind of, an interesting time, especially with the snow starting to come down.
Was it actually
December
a
at that
self-portrait or a photo taken of you by another squad?
That was just a photo we took when we were outdoors, just mucking around a bit. Actually, I did that dark image to the right of it. That was actually just after our tent caught on fire. That one there, we'll kind of just, kind of talking about what had just happened, and that was an interesting experience. So I specialized as a paramedic in my service. So we were doing a lot of practicing. We did 2 months of training to get the qualification, and then we did spend another 2 weeks doing practicing exercises and stuff, like kind of as real as possible to get used to our positions, the processes to go through, identifying different injuries and whatnot. And so that image was of my squad doing field hospital training there. And so the final image is, I'm not sure exactly when that was taken, but that kind of represents the kind of end of the service. We do this, they do a big kind of NATO exercise every year that's got all the Estonian forces from other countries too for a week, for 2 weeks, just essentially practicing war games. But once that's done, so you're always in a truck going around, or whatever vehicle you have. Normally I'm in the ambulance. And so that kind of, represents the end of that period of the service. And kind of, I think the running kind of theme whenever we're driving somewhere is everyone just trying to get as much sleep as they can, because you don't get too much when you're out in the forest.
So technically, would you say that there are any, probably there are not many major differences between the 3 large format works that you presented in this exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, they're all pretty similar in terms of processes. The main differences would be my approach to I guess, coloring them with spray paint. Like for this one, I was trying to keep it much more subtle. And it's with when you get the paper like these ones commercially printed, or if I screen print the work onto the paper, the consideration is also how the image has been printed. So these works had these streaks going through them. So, I mean, that becomes a bit of the work as well. Like,
you're talking about
directly
in the background?
The kind of streaking there. And I mean, once that's in the work, that's in the work. That's like kind of a very obvious sign that this is a print artwork. If I screen print it, maybe there's areas missing, and that's also a consideration, like, of how I spray onto the work as well. So essentially, if it misprints, or if I make a mistake, I like to just incorporate that into the work. I think that's part of the process. I'm not making nice photographic images. I'm making print art. I think it's good to kind of what's the word? Just accept these kind of things that can happen when it comes to printing.
I mean, it's part of the printmaking process, really.
Yep.
When you experiment, you're bound to not have uniformity, which can be absolutely boring. Okay, now, very important question. Now, Evan, I'm just wondering if I stop screen share, whether you'll be able to share probably more easily how these works contrast with your usual screen printing works. And I believe that you've got some images that you might have prepared for us. I'm just for a second.
I think I sent you an email with them. It might be easy for you to share on this. I've got them here though.
There's something that's happened. Okay, all right. I might just get you to do the sharing if that's all right. I'll just make you co-host. Now, in the meantime, I also want to sort of draw attention to, what was your winning work in the 2019 Lloyd Rees Youth Art Award, which was also a very political piece, smaller format because partly constrained by the dimensions of the constraints of dimensions for the competition. But it was about what was happening in Hong Kong at that period of time. So while you prepare your images, I'm going to ask this question, which will probably be of interest to some people attending here. So, you obviously follow a long line of artists who, use their art practice for, commentary or more than commentary of social issues of the day. Would you consider yourself as an artist activist? And why not?
Oh shit, that's a good question.
That's a tricky one, but it's an important one.
Yeah, you got me with that one. That's okay. I think that's a bit of a yes and no. I'd say a lot of my work does have this commentary. In terms of being kind of activist work, it definitely depends on which artwork. Like the Hong Kong one, for instance, that was me kind of showing what was happening at the time, what I'd seen, a bit of my feelings towards it, like using the smoke flares, but also trying to add a bit of a narrative in there as well. I wouldn't consider that activist work on its own, but the reception I got from people who are from Hong Kong, directly even involved in those protests, they loved the work. They were really happy that I'd made the work and kind of raising awareness. So in a way, it was a bit of an activist work in that they resonated with it, but
in a passive way, not
yeah,
you are making a particularly bold political statement.
No, and in terms of actually making activist work, I have been doing some street art while I've been in Estonia, and I did a Free West Papua mural over here, and that did get, and that, I mean, that was a very direct kind of political statement, trying to raise a bit of awareness. And I was talking to someone who was from West Papua and trying to see what he thought and get their kind of feedback as well. I think you need to have that dialogue with people who are involved in that actual process if you want to make political kind of activist work. That's
absolutely right. Now, so for people not in the know, is there what actually led you to sort of direct your art practice in this way with a kind of political bent? Were there some artists that you were particularly inspired by when you were starting out working in this vein?
And that's actually quite a good question as well. So the process, this artistic process I developed during university at Sydney College of the Arts during second year. And I guess you could say the inspiration for what I was doing at that time wasn't necessarily an artist, but kind of football supporter culture. The imagery from that was flags, flares, banners and stuff, and the giant tifos, like the banners they make to pull over the crowd before the game, like made all by the fans and stuff like that. I've been following that for a long time. And so I was making work about the football crowds, the supporter culture, and my political interest is pretty much entirely formed from being a football fan in Sydney. Like, I think sport's entirely political, especially football in Australia very much has a history of that. But across the globe as well, like I think I learned more about kind of global politics going to football games with these guys I met at the pub, and they're talking about stuff and learn about issues and stuff happening overseas from them. And so in terms of, my process and everything that's developed, I'd say it's the inspiration's been football rather than any other artist in particular. But of course, I'm always going to exhibitions, looking at different work like street artists and stuff. I mean, graffiti art, that's always been an influence as well. I think I was doing stencils and stuff in high school. So
for us, I mean, again, that's from a curatorial perspective. It's wonderful to be able to sort of, in a way, query the role of the white cube and bringing what's obviously very much, inspired by street art or certain aspects of street art and sort of protest type art into the gallery setting. So that is from a curator's perspective. Now, Evan, do you want to show us your samples of some of your other works that are quite different to the processes that are here?
So
I can try looking it up as well.
oh no, I've got it. So on the topic of the football kind of stuff, is that up okay?
Yes, fantastic.
Yep. So this is a work I did in 2016 or 17. And this is really going directly to that, the theme of football supporter culture. This is a screen print with spray paint, so similar process, but this was actually made from images I took in Prague at a game many years ago. And also the first European football team to visit Australia in 1923. So that's a little fun fact there. So their logo is actually kangaroo.
But it's interesting how the materiality really changes, how people, respond to work when you print on thicker fine art paper.
Yep.
It's a little small on the screen. I don't know if everyone present can see, but the fact that it's not sort of in grid format. So if you encounter this in person, so it's in some thick quality, nice fine art paper, your response to it will be slightly different from what is clearly the paste up sort of setting that we've got in Evan's current show in our gallery. So that's
definitely so.
That's a very interesting and important example of how the materiality, as simple as the paper, the texture, just changes, how one responds to the work.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make there, because it feels, if you see the work in person, it definitely feels very much like a fine art rather than like kind of a paste up thing's totally different, really. There's a permanence to work on fine art paper that's very apparent.
Mm. I mean, in a way, with the pay stubs, it also talks about the transient nature of all these, you know, urgent as they are with some of these matters. It's talking about the now and the temporary. Whereas when you look at something that's more like a finite object, there is, you know, to some extent, not always, and you know, some reference to it, you know, having longer staying power, you know, and for a longer period of time. So that's quite an interesting contrast. Evan, would you like to show us another example before we open the questions to open it up to question time?
This is going to be another long one, but also as a bit of a reference point, this was my third year major work from uni, and this was kind of, I guess, the start of this screen print spray paint process. So it was, yeah, quite experimental at the time for me, but I think you can see the connection between the work and the current exhibition still. So it's, I mean, it's quite similar still to what's in the exhibition, but of course, yeah, that idea of the kind of permanence on the fine art paper compared to, yeah, what's very much a temporary work when you paste it up is an interesting thing. I hadn't thought about that too much recently.
Great. So final question from me, Evan. Where next, particularly in the vein of experimentation? You were almost forced by circumstances to experiment with mediums and methods of printmaking. So has that experience in being, you know, having done the residency in Estonia, you know, having a bit of time to travel, you know, to other parts of Europe, has that sort of, you know, helped to direct you in where next and what's next steps you'll be taking in your practice?
Oh, definitely. I think, I mean, it's certainly a bit of a privilege to be able to have this residency during these times. So just certainly have to acknowledge that, and especially being able to travel around too in Europe. But it's been a massive eye-opener in terms of kind of opening up my thought and material process as well in terms of my art practice. I think almost kind of being able to think about my printmaking in a different way, like kind of being open to new ideas and new approaches. I mean, once you change the materials, then that can completely create new ideas. And I think that's a big thing that's come out of the residency. But recently being in Berlin and checking out some galleries and stuff there, and like that kind of inspiration, I kind of forgot about what an impact it can have to go to a few galleries, see new work, and then go, oh shit, that's really cool. I should try something like that, or I've really got to experiment a bit more. And so, yeah, once I'm back in Sydney, I think it's going to be a lot of, just creating as much new work as I can, and just really not getting too hung up on having a perfect process, but just doing new things and seeing what happens, and just accepting it, I guess, in a way.
Look forward to the next step of your artistic journey. Well, thank you. And now we're just going to open up to attendees to ask questions. We'll just ask you to turn on your videos and then, you know, address and introduce yourselves and ask the question directly that way. So anyone would like to begin? I'm sure there are questions. I mean, it's a very rich practice that Evan has.
If
Yep,
there isn't,
Oh.
oh, hey,
hello, I'll have a go. Lovely to see you. You've come a
yeah,
long
you
way.
too.
You've really come a long way. Talking about whether your art was activist, I actually had in my head, I'd thought of it as being journalistic more than activist.
Yeah.
Like you were reporting things, you're showing people things they wouldn't necessarily see, images they wouldn't have access to, and putting it together in kind of a universal compilation of this is how things are all around the world in different situations. So it kind of seems like a journalistic approach. I don't know if that is something that may be true.
That's a good way of putting it as well, actually. I think that, yeah, that kind of speaks a bit to the truth behind the work, but not necessarily like being like, I'm trying to get you to think this or do this from what I'm creating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Good stuff.
that's a good point. And Patricia's my year 12 visual arts teacher, actually, from back in the day.
Well done, you must be proud.
Yeah, very. And sometime employee, because Evan's been coming back and doing workshops with our students. And it's just lovely to see the way he interacts with them, and like so careful with his process. It's excellent. Yeah.
Thanks, Patricia.
Very good.
Yeah, that's a good insight.
Thanks.
Thank you. Lachlan.
Hey, Evan.
Hey.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, it's kind of what Patricia said about journalism sort of approach, like, if you could see yourself going out into conflict zones, putting yourself in those areas, like, would you do that as part of, or yeah, what would you?
Okay, I think I'm almost at my dad, my girlfriend's probably listening to this, so they probably don't like this answer, but that's actually been, so actually I should plug a podcast I've been listening to, Popular Front, which is essentially where I get a lot of my information over the last year about these kind of more obscure conflicts and stuff. He's a independent journalist that does go to like these conflict zones and to document and report on them. And I mean, I think getting that firsthand experience and being able to kind of get your own documentation and to develop that into work would be hands down the best process to make an artwork about that specific thing. And it's always like, if you have an opportunity to talk to people from these areas, especially in person, that's a whole other thing that you can take on board. And I guess kind of keep the work, can't think of the right word for it, but I mean, keep the work honest. Like, you don't want to just kind of just use someone else's situation for your own kind of commercial benefit or something. I think, yeah, keeping the work honest is important. Yeah.
Do you find that the political edge can get dulled a bit when it translates to a gallery context? Do you think it can get lost in translation, or?
I think it depends on the work. I think with my work, because it's quite obvious, that's not such a problem. But if I was doing much more abstract stuff, then I think, like if the 8 Forgotten Months artwork, for instance, if I didn't do a big kind of mural thing and did lots of these little bullet prints, I'm like, this represents this conflict or whatever, and then I think that's where you'd kind of get more of that kind of losing that edge, certainly.
So I'm going to jump in and comment quickly and in response to Lachlan. So from the point of view of the gallery, I think his work in this show is pretty subversive, not just because of the content, but also the materiality, as I said. if it were actually ironically delivered as fine art print, then it well could, it could well lose its meaning. But coming in, you can see that the paste ups are not perfect. They are actually intentionally so, like you would just see them on the streets. So that was part of, that mode of communication, so that message wasn't lost.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And no, it's cool to
Yes,
see you.
Yes, thank you, because I want to say that a lot of galleries probably not want to do that as well.
Yeah, that was a bit of a worry of pasting up all this stuff. Yeah.
Any other questions from others? These have been very good questions and responses so far. Thank you. Peter. Peter, you're on mute.
I'm just curious to know, not so much about your art, but about your experience post national service conscription. It's not just like Australia, defending Australia. Estonia, I've got heritage on my father's side. I've only been to Estonia once. But I'm just kind of curious. Estonia has been an oppressed state, been a slave state for 1,000 more years. We could spend hours on the history of it. But there's only been a short window that Estonia has been free, and you're in that period. So it's not just, helping the country out. There's a lot to it. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on your experience post that time in terms of your independence, your kind of being a bit of a risk taker, kind of really giving life a really good shake. Because I've seen that in a lot of Estonians can do, it's unbelievable what they can do. My short time there. I'll leave it to you to comment.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a result of the circumstance of COVID as well. Like personally for me, I was stuck over there anyway, so you may as well make the most of it. And especially if you've got the opportunities to take as well, like going into this artist residency almost directly after finishing the service, that gave me quite a bit of direction still. So but in terms of it's quite a good time to be over there at the moment. Things are really moving upwards and onwards, and having a lot of fun and enjoying life over there. It's nice to be in a small city too, where you can walk half an hour to get anywhere. That's quite convenient too. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And of course, and drawing on the experiences of what I've done over there that's a big motivation to kind of make new work too.
Thank you, Peter. Questions from anyone else?
If there is no more questions, well, actually, I can make a bit of a quick comment on the locked in, locked out artwork when we're done.
That's what I was going to ask about, actually, Evan. I couldn't stop my video. So it's
okay. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello?
Evan, would you like to talk about that lock and lock out work?
Yep. So
you need the screen share on, or are you happy to just?
Yeah, actually, if we could drop the screen share.
Okay, just 1 second.
I think it's towards the end of the video, actually. About 2/3. Yeah. So there is a couple of elements I've incorporated into this, that, or is it just the one for this one? But the army kind of general figure in the middle there, I forgot what his name was, but that image of him was actually taken from a video, like a anti-refugee video, where he's pretty much saying, which they sent to other countries, yeah, don't come to Australia, we'll stop you. Don't come by boats, you'll get sent back. So when I was making this locked out work, I was definitely looking for those references of the kind of issue of the boat people and kind of how that issue was treated. So that's so if you did see those kind of references, if you saw the work in person, then that was a deliberate choice, comparing that situation with the current one in terms of kind of the military involvement as well. But yeah, just want to add that in because that's not something I think most people would know about.
Thank you. Questions from anyone else before we wrap up?
Just quickly on that. So you're comparing the COVID passengers on the cruise liners, sort of the COVID impact from the cruise lines, and reflecting that with the boat people coming in and being pushed back.
Not so much that, is it just more of a broader kind of comment about the border closures, the kind of very harsh response. I mean, it's definitely not the same as what happened with the boat turnbacks, but in terms of how this kind of border closure feels, it's for someone overseas, I could actually, it was a comment from that I'd kind of thought that without boat people to worry about, they had to find a new scapegoat during COVID. So I kind of saw that as Australians overseas. So kind of the who can we pass the blame on to now for our problems? If there's no foreigners coming into the country, then Australians overseas are the next best thing.
Fair enough.
Any final questions or comments from anyone before we wrap up?
So, yeah.
Well,
I think that's about it.
Yep, I think we covered a lot of ground. Thank you everyone for your time, for attending this very interesting talk, and thank you for spending time explaining your practice and this exhibition to us, Evan, particularly given the time difference and all, although I don't think it's too bad given that it's morning in Germany now.
Yep, I'm going straight back to sleep after this.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you.
And thanks for the comments during the thing as well. I saw them, but yeah,
thank
just
you for everyone's
keep train
comments in the chat as well.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Bye.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.